Hi, this is Mike Hendrickson from Software Architecture Conference in New York City. I'm here with Steve Pousty. Steve, how you doing?
Good, Mike. How you doing?
I'm doing well. So you're with Red Hat. You've been there for a while.
Hence the logo.
The Red Hat, yes. Yep. And you work on the cloud group?
Yeah, I'm in the cloud BU, but my main focus is on OpenShift. And so OpenShift is Red Hat's distribution of Kubernetes. And so sometimes when I say distribution, they think, oh, you just take the bits and give them straight to me. And it's not like that. It's much more like what Red Hat does with Linux. So it's basically the same business model.
So what is that relationship between OpenShift and Kubernetes? It's not one and the same.
No. So it's I can explain it as a metaphor, I think, so that a lot of people will get it, and then I'll give some details around it. So when we ship Red Hat Enterprise Linux, we don't just give you a kernel and say, hey, here's a kernel, have fun, right? So we take the kernel, and we help maintain it and do all that stuff with it, but we don't own it. But we take the kernel, and then we put a bunch of stuff around it, like GNOME and X Windows and all sorts of other utilities and Postfix, and we make it into a distribution so that it's actually usable for your company, so that you can do stuff with it, and we give you support and all that stuff. So we're doing the same thing with Kubernetes, right? So we don't own Kubernetes. It's an open source project started by Google, but we're the #2 contributor. But then we take Kubernetes, straight Kubernetes, like it's not a fork, same thing with the Linux kernel. We don't fork the kernel, we don't fork Kubernetes. It's straight Kubernetes, and then we put stuff around it to make it better for systems administrators and developers, and just make it easier to install, just make it more productive, like a real distribution, rather than, oh, here's Kubernetes, have fun. Right, so that's our business. We are trying to make everybody more effective.
So how does OpenShift then make it easier for developers to build applications and to deploy applications?
So developers, what I've seen with a lot of developers is they're excited about Docker containers or containers in general, but they don't actually want to become experts in Docker, right? They're like, oh, that's a cool tech.
And let me ask you this. Are they excited about it, and do they know what they're getting into?
I think...
Or
I think some of the early people were actually really excited about it because those early people had actually dug in. I think some people now are excited about it because you have to be excited about it, otherwise you seem like you don't know what you're talking about. But there is stuff to be excited about with containers. I mean, it does make running your application and actually... getting your application onto the server much easier, because what it does is rather than just laying down the bits, it actually lays down the bits and how to run it. So your ops person can just say Docker run, or in our case, Kubernetes deploy or OpenShift deploy, and it actually runs the container, and then it's really easy to scale and do stuff with. And so what we do in OpenShift with that, so that developers don't have to learn quite as much about Docker, is for, let's say, a Java developer, they can just give us a POM.xml, like a Maven build file, and their source code, and we have builder images. So you say, OC, run this source code with this builder image, and we actually take them, put them together, build a new Docker image, and then push that into our integrated Docker registry. So OpenShift has a registry in it, and then that automatically deploys out. So they don't even know that they've necessarily touched Docker.
When you say they,
the developer.
Developer or the system administrator?
Either.
Either. How are they getting along in this new world of trying to orchestrate what each of them are doing?
So that's the nice part. So the scenario I just gave, the developer really only cared about their code, right? They didn't actually have to worry about how is this going to get deployed and all that other stuff. And what the systems administrator can do through OpenShift is actually set up how things get deployed, or what's the they can configure that. The developer can too, but the administrator can say, this is the secure Docker image I want you to use to build it. I don't want you using some willy-nilly thing off a Docker hub. I actually want you to use this one that I've built, I know all the layers, I'm maintaining it. And the developer's like, great, you did all that low-level Docker stuff, I built my source code, and together we're deploying something so both groups. Ops cares about risk. That's their main thing. And developers care about speed, right, and agility. And so what this allows is, ops is controlling the risk of the container, and developers are getting exactly what they want so they can iterate as fast as they want. And it all happens through orchestrating and scheduling this on OpenShift.
And are you guys seeing more of the two blended, the DevOps person? Or is that a nice thing to be striving towards?
So with the DevOps, what I've been seeing more about DevOps is it fits really well with microservices. And so what I'm seeing more of that is you're bringing the ops person into the developer team, and so they're working together. But this enables that model. Part of what DevOps is all about is automation. And so part of the benefit of having something like OpenShift is all that stuff that you would have done, like a blue-green deployment, you can automate that, where there's no humans actually in there messing things up. giving a URL to an application. It's automated, so you don't have to go to your ops person and say, yeah, give me access to the DNS tables, which they'll never do, right? They can set it up so it's controlled and repeatable, and the developer gets to do the things they want to do without having to bug people and wait on people to do things for them and spin up a VM and please edit the DNS table. So I see it more as like, so this comes from my therapist. She once said to me, clear boundaries, infinite possibilities. And at first when she said that, I was like, what? But if you think about it, a lot of the times when there's conflicts between dev and ops, it's because there's this area where they both feel they have an intersection, and neither one is getting what they want. So what happens with something like OpenShift is devs do dev stuff, and ops set up the cluster in a way that they're like, fine, I've given you that cluster, you can do anything you want in that cluster, and it's not going to affect me. So we have I control how the cluster's set up. You get to do everything else you want on that side. And for the developer, it's like, you just give me this image, and I don't have to bug you anymore. So it helps draw this really clear meeting place where responsibilities get much easier separated.
So it's a clear meeting space now, but when we introduce serverless and when we're running functions and containers and all that together, is that still going to be that easy?
Yeah, so serverless is this new trend, right? And I think it's it's big.
Is it a trend or is it?
It's a new technology.
Is that been recycled from 40 years ago or 20 years ago or?
I'm trying to think. I mean,
or have we always wanted to go this way?
I don't. So let me define what I think serverless is first.
Sure.
So serverless to me, if you look at something like Amazon Lambda, what it is somebody's running a server off somewhere, and I submit code to it, and then it spits back its result to me. And so I've never set up a server. I'm not doing anything. I'm just setting code and getting it back, right? And so that works for Amazon because it fits into their whole model, which is we're going to run everything for you, right, and you just use us. So when people talk about like serverless inside their company or something like that, if you want to adopt serverless without being tied into Amazon, someone's going to need to install something serverless somewhere. So I think the serverless abstraction is actually a concept that it's serverless from the viewpoint of the developer. So you can't say like containers can do serverless. Containers can't really do serverless on their own, but they can to a developer. So somebody has to write something in containers, then probably put it inside of Kubernetes or OpenShift, and then to the developer, it ends up looking like, oh, it's serverless, but someone's still going to have to run a server somewhere with the code in it. So you can bring it inside your company and tell the developers, we're going to give you serverless. It's just not running in Amazon. It's running here, but somebody's going to have to write code to accept the serverless stuff and still have to run those servers.
And would that give someone like serverless Kubernetes inside the organization?
Yeah, so I think basically, so there still have to be sysadmins who set up the OpenShift or Kubernetes structure, and then there'll have to be somebody who writes the code that accepts the serverless stuff. But to the rest of the so there'll be a group of developers who are maintaining the serverless infrastructure and ops people, but to the rest of the developer organization, it's as if they were talking to Lambda, right, or some other serverless situation. So to me, serverless is an interesting abstraction, and you can have it anywhere. It just depends. It's serverless to who, right? You can't just. There's still people at Amazon who write the code that runs Lambda.
So
right?
someone built the infrastructure that something's running on.
Exactly. So serverless is kind of it's serverless to the developer. Okay. It's not like there's no server anywhere. You always have to have servers running. At least at this age in computing, there's always a machine running somewhere that's running some code. Whether the real question is, what does it look like to the developer? So containers and OpenShift can actually make that easier, right? To actually set that up inside your organization, but you still are going to need a server and something to accept it to have serverless.
Okay. So if you were to sit down, and again, we'll sit down maybe in London or here next year.
Okay.
What would you say you'd like to see happen in this space in 12 months? And what would you like to see Red Hat doing differently in 12 months?
Okay.
In the same space.
Right. So what I would like to see in 12 months, so I've already seen these changes as well. So I actually, it's nothing that I want to be different. So I've talked to software architecture a couple times. And when I first gave some of these talks about OpenShift, when we moved to the Kubernetes and container model, I said, how many people here know Docker containers? And like a few hands went up. And I was like, how many know Kubernetes? And no hands went up. This year when I gave that talk, almost everybody had known containers and Docker containers already, and maybe a quarter of the room had known Kubernetes and what it does.
And that was use Kubernetes or
just
deploy,
even knew about it.
Okay.
Like,
okay.
So I'm just trying to see like how much do I have to educate the audience on what we're doing here.
Yeah.
And so what I'd like to see is a continuation of that trend where people, I think to be relevant in development and to be relevant in operations, you actually do need to know about containers now. Like some people I think probably were waiting like, oh, this is the latest fad, right? This is like what happened with Rails, Ruby on Rails, which was a really great paradigm shift, but I've seen that kind of just drop off. It's not as popular as it once was. I think containers, they've been here for a long time, but this new push to containers is actually here to stay. And once you start running containers, you need to orchestrate and schedule them. So for me, I think OpenShift and Kubernetes is the best way to do that. You could also be looking at Docker Swarm or Mesosphere, right? Those are other orchestration and scheduling frameworks, but more of this awareness among developers and ops people about this new way of horizontal scaling, a lot more about this new cloud, building things for cloud, right? Which is to the cloud, right? It's like any term. What Red Hat should be doing differently? Absolutely nothing. We're perfect in every single way. What I'd like us to be doing differently is keep iterating and improving our developer experience so that it becomes even easier for developers to do their daily work on OpenShift. That's what Red Hat really is all in on containers. And when I was making that analogy about Kubernetes and the Linux kernel, that wasn't just because it's a good analogy. I mean, that is how Red Hat is now. So when people come up and say, how big is the OpenShift team? I say, well, it's kind of hard to say because, we've got the people who contribute directly to Kubernetes, and then we got people who build the OpenShift interfaces. But like all the way down to the RHEL people who used to just be RHEL, they're building stuff around containers. They're building stuff that makes it better in Kubernetes. So there's been a real shift in Red Hat. Like this is where the puck is kind of moving, and we're going there with it. When we think it, but the reason the puck is going there is because a lot of our customers are saying this makes our life better, and we want more of this. So
excellent. So last question for you.
Yeah.
Do you eat ice cream? And if you do, what's your favorite flavor?
So, okay, I'm glad you asked that question. So I have an opinion about ice cream. I like mint chocolate chip as my go-to, right? And so if I go just to any random ice cream place, I'm probably going to go with mint chocolate chip. It's minty and fresh, but it's got cream, and then it's got a little bit of chocolate. Like what can basically go wrong? I prefer when it's not green, because that's usually just dye. Mm-hmm. So I prefer not to have the dye, but I'll go with it anyway. But then if I go to a good ice cream place, then it's like game on. So like there's this place in Santa Cruz where I live called Mary Ann's, and they have like Mexican chocolate and on horchata flavor.
Ooh.
So basically when I do that, I get those together. I'm like, oh, I'm in Mexico with my ice cream, and it's like this really nice cinnamony and yum. But then they also have this really good dark chocolate flavor. I forget the name of it, but they have like an Oregon blackberry. So you put chocolates and blackberry. So I have a favorite flavor that I go to as my standard, but there's lots that I, kind of.
And when you travel around the world, do you go to ice cream shops to find out what they do?
So sometimes I do. So I went to, when I was in Israel in Beersheba, there's a famous ice cream place there called Glida Beersheba, so I would go there and try that. Ooh, when I was in Italy, I actually had real gelato in Italy, and then I discovered that all the people who call themselves gelato places in the United States are lying. Right? Like when I had that gelato, it was like, what is this magic? Oh my gosh. But you know what has recently, I think, happened to me? I think I'm starting to get lactose intolerant.
Ooh.
So I'm going to have to start, my new area of discovery will have to be in lactose-free ice creams, like the rice creams or something like that.
Yeah.
So,
excellent. Steve, we look forward to future conversations and ice cream.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks. Thank you.